Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about team sizes and organization. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, is each software development team around 2 to 5 people big, even at really large companies, or can there be hundreds or even thousands of developers in one team? Or how are the thousands of developers organized? Excellent question. So this depends a little bit on the company itself, sort of how it organizes teams. There's a popular trend where we say that teams are self-organizing, which is just a way of saying basically that you are giving an area of responsibility, and then it is up to you to sort of figure out how to deliver on the responsibilities that come with that area. And so what's most common is that when you have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of it's not just software developers, by the by. There's a lot of people in IT that are not software developers. Like they're everything from stakeholders to like they are non-technical stakeholders, like customer types, or like there can be like product owners, product managers, different experts from different domains, marketing, sales. There's so many people, guys, that make up an IT company. You have no idea. The only thing that an IT company really is limited in terms of like what you have in terms of expertise is, I'm not going to go as far as to say your imagination, but guys, there are people whose main job is to create a nice office space for the development teams, or like personal trainers. Like I mean, I don't even work in the US. I can just imagine that like they might have people working in some of these companies where, I mean, you can probably find a psychiatrist and things like that. I'm not gonna say too much about it, but the way that the teams are usually organized is in areas. So this is an interesting thing because each company does management a little bit differently. There are many models for how to organize a big company because there are different levels of organization. As you can imagine, at the lowest level you have the organization of the team, and you've probably heard this before, where we say that agile work practices, waterfall work practices, sort of the way that the team is structured internally, that is the lowest unit usually. And then there are more levels on top where you might have like an area of responsibility, a product area, a cluster. There are many terms for it, where it's just a group of responsibility. In a sense, and this is sort of what I think is the beautiful part about domain-driven design, in a sense you can think of it as a domain, where certain teams, and this can be many teams, it can be hundreds of people, are organized around one area of the company business model. And you can grow it to like multiple layers if you wanted to. But it's actually not that difficult to picture how all of these different people are organized, because when you start realizing that a system, and this is where I argue that most people start to really understand when microservices is becoming like something that makes a lot of sense. If you have a system that requires hundreds, if not thousands, of software developers, it's really difficult to have just one gigantic super system that does everything, right? So you have to start splitting things out. Now, the simple way to think about this is that each group of people has a responsibility for part of the entire system that the company is managing, right? And you have different products and different product areas and so forth. So say, let's take Google for example. They have a lot of products, guys. A lot of them are like, some of them you know about, and some of them are internal things, and some are for very specific types of customers or different like companies that you might not know about. And so it's usually very organic for you to create like a product area where you might have many teams working on that specific area of the product, and that system does something. An example would be, say, Facebook. I mean, Facebook is a gigantic platform, and each of the different features that you have there, some of those features are owned by the same teams, and some of them are owned, like they're so big that there are many teams working on that same functionality. And so when we organize the teams, that's usually the way that we focus things. We focus on adding a team for each part of the system, each service within the distributed network or things like that. That can be split in many ways, but I think that conceptually it's easy for you to think about that. So you're one node in this ecosystem of different teams. And so what your job usually comes down to is to figure out, okay, what part do you play in the delivery, like the overall goals of the product that you're working on and in terms of the company. So a popular thing that is emerging these days is what we call OKRs. And the idea being, in essence, now this is extremely broad stroked, guys, you can go and read more about this stuff, where the company at the higher levels, like when you're dealing with a company that is the size where it's almost impossible, you don't even know most of the people's names, it's sort of hard to just have this super flat structure with which you can have in a small company. In a small company, you don't usually have necessarily all these extra layers on top and like segmented areas and so forth, because you just have a very small system, and it really doesn't make sense to have all these extra layers on top. But when you have thousands of people working, it's usually a necessity. So the company will put forward some type of objective. Let's say they want to increase conversion, or they want to ship a new product feature or something like that. And then depending on the areas they have split out the different departments into, they will synchronize with some type of manager or like some type of area lead, like whoever is responsible for that segment of people, and say, hey, we want to build these things, can you help us plan out a roadmap for how to make that happen? And then in turn they go to the teams, or guys, this is just a really simple simplification. There might be 5 people depending on how the management structure is, that plan things out, and then go down to the product teams, the actual teams that are going to do something or do the coding, and tell them basically, yeah, we want to be able to ship these and these things. Can you estimate this work? How long does it take to build this feature, and so forth and so forth. So the best picture you can sort of imagine is this traditional corporate way of working. It's a tree, basically. It's not a binary tree, but it's a tree. It's a tree structure where you have someone at the top who who delegates responsibilities to someone a little bit further down. It's like a pyramid, and then it goes lower and lower until you hit the product teams that are at the lowest level, and they usually are responsible for one part of the system or one set of products or something like that. This is how you can, and for all its faults, in a sense, it's very similar to how the army is organized. Most ways of running a big corporation works in the same way. I don't really know of, depending on how you want to define it, of any company structure that doesn't boil down to that thing, that there's almost always a pyramid or like a tree structure to the way that you delegate work. And the powerful part about it is that you can scale that. I mean, as you can imagine, an army or anything like that, it can be thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, and it still sort of works. The problem comes, well, let's not go into the problem, but the problem is usually not to structure work so that everybody can contribute in a meaningful way. The hard part is to align everybody, to make sure that everybody has an equal understanding of what's going to be built, and that you can sort of trust that communication flows effectively and stuff like that. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way that you usually structure software teams is that you create a team of, usually, as you said, it's 2 to 5, maybe a few more people. And even though you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teams or people, it's actually fairly simple to structure that in an effective way, because you segment off pieces of the overall system that you're working on to different teams. And so they're just responsible for one thing, as you think about it as a node in a network, one node in the network. And then it usually works upwards as a tree, where higher management have some goals based on whatever they need to do, right? And then they cascade the responsibility downwards. That is usually how most companies work. And then every company has like their own flavor of exactly how they segment things and how they split the responsibilities and so forth. But there's a lot of patterns that you can read up on if you're more interested in like how to run an IT company at like these larger scales. Have a great day.